also would like to thank for the invitation. I really feel very much honored. And then I would like to give some comments on Professor Tapper's paper. I would like to focus on the elements of diversity which really tend to be overlooked in the present situation, and focus on the problem of the nomads, which face at the present time um, the difficulty that, for example, the Hazaras strongly occupy their central regions and tend not to admit nomads to their former pasture grounds. And as Mr. Professor Tepper mentioned, that the nomads and the migrant traders had been an important element of interregional communication. So that element has been taken up by migrant mujahideen or refugees and migrant traders who, without the help of nomads, provide themselves with their goods and necessities of life directly from Pakistan. And following this, there have emerged numerous new bazaars in regions which have been traditionally economically underdeveloped, there as the trade has been monopolized by the nomads. And in a perspective for new development of Afghanistan for repatriation, any central government or any provincial administration should take care to not to re-centralize Afghanistan too much, to make Kabul and the big provincial capitals become economically too powerful, so that the development of trade which has emerged during the war can be taken as a basis for decentralized regional development and as a chance and as an asset as well for the future central government in Kabul, as for the foreign aid organizations or the NGOs, which are at the moment already taking advantage of it. And on the other hand, I agree with a very important fact Professor Tapper mentioned, that by the contacts created by people by their common situation as refugees, by meeting in Pakistan or in Iran, the common understanding and the information about each other has considerably increased. So people from Kabul who never knew what was happening on the countryside now met people coming from there, and vice versa. People coming from the countryside to an extent got urbanized or got maybe in the camp some rudimentary education, some access to literacy, or others who were forced by their situation to take work in Iran, in Pakistan, in the Gulf countries, got some professional performance, which will be of a big advantage to a future Afghanistan, will, I think, promote a modernization and will also promote the self-reliancy of Afghanistan and of the Afghans and decrease the dependency on foreign aid. Though the dependency on jobs and working abroad will, to my opinion, remain for a long time, and that should also be a political objective of any future Afghan government, to maintain friendly relationships with all the neighbors and to get that necessary part of migrant labor into organized ways, because as we all know, Afghan workers mostly are very sadly exploited in the neighboring countries. They are not allowed to work officially, and uh, this way they have a very insecure position, though their work, their contribution is so very important for feeding their families back home, or even for feeding and financing the jihad. So these were my remarks. Thank you.
I would also like to start by thanking for the invitation to participate in this seminar, for which I feel very honored and grateful. And then I would like to elaborate on a few of the points made by Dr. Tapper. First of all, the very important issue of regarding the accommodation between a future state power in Afghanistan and local cultural and political traditions. As far as I have understood from my own fieldwork in Kuna, which took place around the time of the coup d'etat in April 78, the major reason behind at least the initial rebellions against the new government was its interference in local affairs, its oppression of the local autonomy, which had existed in various forms up until the time of the coup d'etat. And this was what sparked the resistance more than any resistance against reforms or socialist policies and so on, which people in the countryside did not know very much about at the time. It also played a role, of course, but I think, at least from my own personal experiences, that the major reasons behind the rebellions was the attempts of the new government to increase its control, often with very high-handed authoritarian means, over populations in the local areas. And therefore, this defense of local political autonomy, local cultural autonomy, has been a central element in the resistance struggle, which should be recognized, I think, now when attempts are being made to reconstruct Afghanistan. And the local the aspirations of local groups, the collaboration with local leadership representing various political tendencies and so on, should be emphasized as a very central and important issue in reconstruction activities. So that even if a new government succeeds the present one and peace returns to Afghanistan, the reconstruction activities, the developmental activities which will follow these, and in which foreign agencies ranging from the UN system to private voluntary agencies in which they will be involved, should recognize the aspirations of the Afghan population in the countryside for local autonomy. And therefore, I agree with Mr. Benderman's point that it would be, if not a catastrophe, then at least a very big problem if re-centralization is stressed too much, if all resources are channeled through a strong central government, which will then try to impose its authority and its rule over local rural communities, be they Pashtun or Hazara or Uzbek or whatever, who has been striving to acquire and maintain local autonomy through the 10 years of resistance struggle. I think that as Richard Tapper also put it, that the center should be prepared to lead a very large measure of local cultural autonomy to regional groupings in various areas, and that a new government, whatever composition it has, should be prepared to play the role of a relatively weak government in order to accommodate what I consider at least the legitimate aspirations of the Afghan population for a large measure of cultural and political autonomy. Thank you. I think that, sorry, now I should go back and then pick up a roll together. Now we should open up the floor for comments. No, first of all, Mr. Tapper should have the chance of responding to the various comments that have come. And then after that, we open the floor for discussion. And as far as I understand it, the microphone standing down there in the aisle is working. And those of you who feel that you have not sufficient vocal power to do without it can use that.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that this is the same old question because we have a time for lunch, and you have to comment and you have to question. There is no alternative, you know. If you are sitting like that and Professor Tapper, I would be looking to you and you are looking to Professor Tapper, it won't solve the whole question because lunch, this 12:30. Okay, thank you very much, please. Just try to make some questions.
Okay, no. Yes, thank you. I'm grateful to the commenters for adding some important points to the few remarks that I was able to make. I don't have any further comments. I agree with everything they say. I would add an extra comment to Asger Christensen's remarks, perhaps. This question of local autonomy versus central control. Obviously, there's no way we as outsiders can dictate or recommend what Afghans should do. We're just trying to point out some of the dangers which are inherent in such a situation. I would simply add again that from an outside point of view, it would be very nice to see Afghans at all levels of society able to determine their own future. But as anywhere else in the world, there are obviously contradictions inherent in this prescription. From my own familiarity with a small region of Afghanistan 20 years ago, expressing here the opinion not of a scholar, but of an outside observer who felt some empathy with the personal problems that were involved, I would not necessarily like to see the local autonomy that I saw being observed in that region being perpetuated in the future. There were injustices there from my point of view as an outsider. I would like to see a greater degree of justice, and if that involves some degree of central control that was not there before, then I would like to see that as a human being. But there are big contradictions there, and maybe this is the stuff again of debate. I don't know.
And one thing I would like
Why not?
I would like everybody who raises questions or make comments to present themselves so that we get to know each other.
Thank you for permitting me to ask you questions. I'm Professor Karmalai. This is my introduction. Peshawar University people, of course, know me. My question is that you have raised certain fundamental issues with which all anthropologists and sociologists have been occupied who took interest in Afghanistan. The first question that one has to be faced with is the dynamics of tribe and state in Afghanistan. The areas of periphery have always been autonomous, and therefore they have raised the question of how to absorb these people into a state machinery. Lack of communication and etc., etc., are the separate things. But I think without understanding the tribal dynamic and the state dynamic, we will not be in a position to make policy suggestions for the future reconstruction of Afghanistan. In the question of diversity, I must point out that no state, modern state, territorial state, can ever claim to be ethno-linguistically homogeneous, including United States. It's the most powerful state, but it is divergent as far as the population is concerned. We should not be frightened over it. The key to the question then would be what sort of program and what sort of reconstruction we can visualize as sitting outside Afghanistan. I understand that if policymakers or those who happen to be in Afghanistan would make it participatory type of programs for the people's reconstruction in which the indigenous local models be developed and evolved rather than imported from the socialist or capitalistic. That will be the key to the solution, and if Afghans are left alone to themselves, they will be able to solve out. The second question that you have raised, sir, is the question of developing consensus. I think consensus is in the offing. And the consensus, the key to the problem of Afghanistan has been that there has been no means and method legitimate enough or acceptable enough to the people to have a means of transference of power. The recent Connard elections, recent AIG formations have pointed toward democratization of Afghanistan. And if I'm not wrong, if we could have a consensus as Pashtuns, then of course the future for Afghanistan's reconstruction as far as political side is concerned will be much easier if we agree on who should rule the country, and that should be left exclusively to Afghans rather than to the foreign forces who prescribe things for them. And you have pointed very rightly to it. But I would ask you another question, which is the question regarding the reconstruction in a physical sense, the environment to be reconstructed, which has been damaged, the field and herds and home have to be rebuilt. In this connection, the question you have raised that some things have to be centralized. I don't think so. The programs may be initiated by a centralized group, but the programs may be implemented to the participation of the people for whom the programs are meant. We think Afghans are incapable of settling their own affairs. This is something wrong, and if this impression is completely wrong, Afghans are capable enough to understand that how the programs are going to be beneficial to them. All that we request the foreign and the internal people that let them evolve a consensus and then follow a reconstruction. This was the part of comment that I could make, but I would suggest to you, sir, that without going into the details of the tribal and state dynamic and the evolution of communities, how the communities can call the whole Pashtuns. I may call myself one part of the segment of the community as an independent man, but when it comes to the loyalties, the local loyalties and the state loyalties, one falls back and extends the limit of Pashtuns to the end of the tribe. So the tribe becomes an entity in itself. So diverse entities can be interwoven into territorial areas, territorialism, only when they are allowed to have their own interests articulated through their own representatives. And we have a traditional jirga system, and that can do it. And this is my humble command.
I think we elect ourselves to speak with this group. I'm Margaret Mills. I'm from the University of Pennsylvania. I really want to solicit comment, I think following up on the problem that you all have presented to us. It seems to me that the problem of centralization, as Professor Karamalahi also pointed out, is being seen from afar, and perhaps there's expertise here from the NGO experienced people that we could solicit. I'm thinking that we've been conceiving of the future government of Afghanistan as a central power brokering resources to the periphery. What we have now is plural brokerage to plural constituencies. And I wonder if some of the NGO people here who have had a great deal of experience in this process could talk to us a little bit about a model in which the central government continued to use these plural constructions and thereby perhaps would be able to continue to foster local organization and local initiative.
Grevemeyer from Free University in West Berlin. I would like to comment very shortly on your idea of, or the idea of factors of diversity and unity. The antagonism between the Kabul state and the rural society, which was actually what we were talking about, the fact before 1980, I think has changed really. Before 1980, the basic political unit in Afghanistan was, as you have mentioned already, the clan Gaum or the village Day. Whilst I think one of the results of this violent struggle of the last 10 years has been that the new lines of loyalties, if one wants, are not any longer the Gaums or the villages, but the regions and the provinces. So what comes up now is, or what one could imagine, is in Afghanistan with very strong regional centers versus a pretty weak central government, or even, if one wants, the possibility of 3, 4, 5 Afghanistans centered in the provinces, and Kabul being only one province among the others. Thank you.
I'm Ashraf Ghani, and I would like to pose a question which would connect Dr. Tapper's presentation to the queries that were raised by Dr. Azamkot. That's the question of the national market. There was no analysis presented of when, how, where a national market was formed in Afghanistan. Because the point of reference was 20 years ago rather than 10 years ago, there might have been de-emphasis on the formation of the national market in absence of consideration. One thing does remain, however, as a fact that has to be taken into account, that by 1978, Afghanistan did have a national market where the price of food reflected the cost of transport. That northern regions became the key production centers for wheat and other crops for the rest of the country. The question of the market, again, is central, I think, to our hopes for peace. Because what differentiates Afghanistan of now from the Afghanistan of the 19th century is the very market-rootedness of a whole series of phenomena. In other words, let's start focusing on how certain kinds of centralizations are produced as a result of the economy, not necessarily as a result of the polity. Because we've been looking down, top down, from the polity down, looking at administrative centralization. One thing from the recent history of Afghanistan is that there was no synchronization between political centralization and economic centralization. They took place apart from each other. So the state, as a result, was always weak when it wanted to parade to being strong. The other point also, I think, needs to be made, that we are generalizing in the absence of any detailed information. We do not have the in-depth, as Dr. Tapper would be the first to agree with, studies of key regions of Afghanistan to allow us to generalize so easily about tendencies. And this may also bring about a comparative contrast to NWP. Tribes in Afghanistan are not tribes in NWP. The state-tribe relationship was of a very different order and proceeded on very different bases during the 18th and 19th century than NWP. So they need to be taken into account, because if we proceed on the basis of false assumptions about the past, we might perpetuate. And my last comment, of course, is that I welcome as an Afghan Dr. Tapper's remark about justice, because the phenomena of justice should not be ignored. The talk of local autonomy should not prevent us from understanding that justice is rooted in kinds of institutions that allow control of local level leaders who become powers unto themselves, and laws do not stand in the way. That one of the strongest tasks that would be facing the new Afghanistan would be how to guarantee rights, not just to groups, but also to individuals.
Happen to respond to? No? Okay. So then
Other people should.
Louis Renner, currently with UNDP. I'd like to take up one or two remarks that were made by Dr. Tapper and by Professor Azam Gul. The situation in Afghanistan as it arises now and was explained in its diversity and fragmentation by Dr. Tapper allows us to think of what is going to happen in the future. And I see it as the three S's. Security, both in terms of local people living peacefully and having their rights justified. Shelter, reconstruction of housing, infrastructure, everything else that goes together in national life, and subsistence. And on the latter, I think that Dr. Azam Gul struck the right chord. There is going to be a tremendous problem in resettlement, and Afghanistan, as I knew it, again, I'm quoting 20 years ago, was rather like a model medieval society. The agriculture in the Harry Root Valley, which I studied, could have been medieval England with strip farming, sharecropping, and all the problems that arose with powerful landlords really abstracting vast sums in terms of crops that had to be returned to the local zamindars. And in the terms of market economy, which the last speaker mentioned, wheat and food is going to be the major problem. And Dr. Azam Gul has indeed been carrying out studies to improve wheat production, and he has done a lot of work on agricultural market surveys. The data is being collected. One of the problems, though, is going to be in farm power. Most of the livestock that was used has been killed or eaten, and Afghanistan is now going to have to make a vast jump forward. It will take something like 10 to 11 years to rebuild draft oxen to the levels that they were before the war. Therefore, we're going to have to think in terms of mechanization. with mechanization, there's going to be a problem that if the land tenure system remains as it was before the war, it is not going to be a suitable land tenure and land use system for mechanization. And this struggle was started by the government in '78 attempting land resettlement. So it's a circular thing. If we have mechanization, you're going to have redistribution of land, and if you have redistribution of land, you're going to increase tension. I leave it at that.